There, I did the business talk for Ian back in 2021, which to date I'm hearing from people how much they appreciated hearing it, because this part of Loothing a lot of people don't talk about, and you're always wondering if you're hitting the mark or not in terms of what you should be charging, whether or not you're making money, whether or not you're getting to the end of the month before you get to the end of the money, or vice versa. And so we decided to resurrect it in a fashion that was less Doug-centric and more a conversation among other Loots, because I also want to start by saying I'm not a business expert. I don't project myself as being one, and I don't want to be seen as, Mr. Wall Street Luth. It's not. I've never went to business school, and the only thing I know about business is that we're in our 39th year of doing this for a living as a business, and for me and Sharon, this has been the only income we've ever had. So, we've managed to survive for almost 40 years by learning most things the hard way. And we thought it would be a good way to have a space for us to talk about these subjects. And my ideas about how we would proceed with it is, rather than get together as Loots and talk about, when you start talking business, it always devolves into the same thing. What do you charge for this? What do you charge for that? And everybody starts talking about pricing. And for my head's sake, it goes well beyond that. And that's why we spent the first episode in this series just talking about pricing. But I want to move this series past that and to talk about other aspects. And in further episodes, we'll be talking about many different subjects, whether it's, insurance, employees, and lots of taxes and lots of different subjects as it relates to us. And of course, every time we get together, we'll be having a different panel of people chit-chatting about it, inventory. And I've got a whole list of topics that we're going to do. And by the way, the next one is in April, and that is going to continue on the path that we currently are, where we're dealing with the 3 Ps of pricing, productivity, and profit. We're going to go circle back to the first one of pricing, but we're going to do a special builder's edition of pricing, and that Michael is going to help me with that. Giuliano has agreed to join us for that, as well as Michael Greenfield is joining us for that as well. And so that's starting to fill out nicely, but that will be focused much more towards how builders, need to think about pricing their work, which means I'll be, more of a bystander for that one and just acting as a referee. But back to what we're doing here, I have very firmly held opinions about how to run a business. That by no means suggests that it's the way you should. It's the way I do. And I have my reasons for doing so, and that's why we're sharing them here. But I also want people who don't agree with me, or don't think like me, or think somewhat like me, or approach it from a different standpoint. Because I don't want to be a preacher up here saying, you have to do this, and you have to do that, and you need to do this, and you need to do that. I'll say those things anyway, but I want it to be balanced by different opinions. This is why I wanted a round table type of format here. So we're by nature creative people who do things with our hands, and not necessarily, always business-minded. Which means we're not money managers. We're either building guitars, repairing guitars, restoring guitars, performing some kind of service. And the act of what we talked about last time, which was pricing, is got to be followed by something else, because you can charge whatever you want, but by the same token, if there's no money left at the end of the month, as I had said before, then your prices, doesn't matter how much you charge for it. If there's nothing left or there's no profit involved, so that's why I wanted to talk about today. But let me start by welcoming our roundtable. We got Moses McKinley up on the top of the screen here. He is representing the music store currently in his current position. You're the repair department head honcho at Czar Guitars, correct?
Yeah, Guitar Czar. I like to refer to myself as the person to blame for the
Okay. There you go. But he's currently working in a music store setting with a very sizable repair shop sitting behind him. We had a long conversation with Moses last year, and the shop is looking good, man.
Yeah,
Easy.
there's a lot going on.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Tons of benches.
It looks a lot different than the last time we saw it.
Yeah. Monthly we change it. We try to consistently. We have one day out of every month where we don't do any Lutherie work, and we spend the day working on the shop to try to optimize every single process we can.
Okay, cool. We'll talk about that. So then we have Nicole Alosinak.
Hello.
Canada here. She is an independent Luth, but not necessarily one who works always alone, because you've had people work in your shop. Would you say you're a builder and a repair person in your mind as it relates to your day-to-day activities? Which in your head comes first?
Probably repair. Just because that's kind of my,
Is that the bread and butter?
it's the bread and butter, and I've been doing it for so long, whereas building is always, well, I mean, it's interesting because I've gone back and forth between building and repairing over the years, like, starting at Laravel, building in that like factory production environment. I started building there, but then I started repairing at Laravel as well, doing the warranty repairs and all the in-house repairs. Yeah, I definitely probably would say repairs first, building secondary. And I find it's a very different mindset for me.
So you've been independent outside of Larrabee for how long now?
After I worked at Laravel, I worked at a local music shop, and I've been on my own since 2003.
Okay.
Yeah, but
20 years?
what's that?
20 years?
20 years.
Yeah.
But I started at Laravel back in '98. So those first 5 years, I was
So you got started when you got started when you were 8 as an
pretty
independent.
much, yeah, totally. It was illegal. They couldn't. They didn't even have to pay me minimum wage. It was totally illegal. No, I was in my 20s. But yeah, so I don't know. But I've been on my own for a while. So yeah.
So then we're also welcoming Michael Bashkin, who needs very little introduction, but he is representing the builder contingent. Now, these days you're just building, Michael, or are you still doing the building and repair stuff?
Just building.
Just
So
building.
kind of like Nicole, I had done both for quite a number of years. Well, probably over close to 20 years. And then I reached a point where I felt like I had to pick one.
Yeah, to pick a master.
Yeah. And I had guitars in order, so that meant I had taken people's deposits. So that kind of made the choice for me.
So in a sense, that was and we'll come back to that, in terms of the how it affects your productivity. But so for you, was it driven by a choice that, because I know Lutz who are guitar builders who repair, sometimes because you have to, or sometimes because you feel you have to, depending on the circumstance. And I know repair people who build guitars. I'm a recovering repair person who built guitars. And I finally gave it up, like a bad habit. I quit smoking too. So for you, was the decision driven purely by logistics of, I can end the repair business easier than I can end the building thing because you had deposits on the books? Or was it driven by your desire to be a builder only?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's not a black and I don't have a black and white answer to that because I did really enjoy doing guitar repairs, and in general, I found them to be more profitable than building. I just felt like I was spreading myself way too thin, and for years I had tried to find somebody to get in the shop to do repairs, and never could quite find the right person or the right arrangement.
Okay.
And yeah, and then one day I had so many guitars in here, I could barely walk among all the cases, and I just said I can't, I can't do this. I can't. I was going to fail at both rather than succeeding at one. So I felt like I really had to pick one.
So you felt like you had that many balls in the air that you were at the risk of everything coming to the ground?
Yeah, I would continually put the repairs first on the schedule uh, because it's a much shorter time horizon involved, and then that made me very late on my builds and delivering those, and so there was more stress building up in that area. And but I did have the order book, or my order book for builds was full enough that I felt fairly confident that I could just choose building at that time.
You had enough dock
Mhm.
that you could feel like you could, before you fell in the water, you had enough dock between you and the boat, that you had to, enough of a runway, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So we're gonna bounce around among the four of us, and I'm gonna try to do this in such a way where I'm gonna kind of try to tee up the ball and let the three of you swing at it. Like I said, because I don't want to be seen as a preacher on this. I have opinions that I'm going to express, but I don't want to be seen as somebody who's, I'll use my official Giuliano wand of waving a wand at people. I do hear from a lot of Loots with a lot of questions. I do probably 2, sometimes 3, for the lack of a better word, one-on-one Loothing sessions a week with just people who are contacting me about a business question. They will spend time on the phone or an IG phone video call or something like that, kind of working through the weeds. And I find the question that's being asked me is never the question that has the answer that is needed. In other words, it's another question that they're asking by asking the question that they're asking me about. That just happened just last night. I was talking to somebody in Chicago, and 2 nights ago had 3 days ago or so, I had almost 2-hour-long conversation with somebody in India. All Loots with the same kind of questions, and that's what the reason for this series. So we have these conversations in front of us as honestly as we can. I mentioned before the 3 Ps, which of course is pricing, which we talked about last time, profit, and productivity. And they're not necessarily in a particular order. We did pricing first because that's the favorite subject of everybody. But before we start talking about productivity, I want to talk about profit. Because altogether in our society, I find the notion of anybody talking about profit as if it were a four-letter word. And both figuratively and literally, it's not a four-letter word. It is perfectly admirable to want to make a profit on what you do. It's perfectly justified for you to make whatever profit you see fit. And it's something that is has so
I'm on it.
that's all right. With that in mind, I want to talk about profit from the standpoint of where I come from as a business person, and of course, loothing is the activity of choice for me. A lot of times I'll hear, well, I don't want to necessarily go there. For me, profit is part and parcel of how I decide how much a job costs. If I revealed my pricing plan or my pricing structure, as opposed to asking the guy down the street how much he gets for a refred, or scouring the internet for people's price lists so I can copy those. For me, it starts with my expenses, and I work up from there, as we explained last time. I don't really want to get into that. But for me, every guitar that hits the bench needs to make a profit for the shop. So I'll hear people talk euphemistically about this kind of work that we do, and I'll hear people say things like, well, you know, it's like, I really don't take on such and such jobs because they're not profitable and I don't make money on them. Well, then there's a problem with the business plan that you have, because if you only want to work on, you know, the axle of the car and not the brakes, because the brakes is where or vice versa, because the brakes is where the money is and the axle isn't, that's a problem with your pricing structure and your profit plan. And you have to have a plan to make profit. Every guitar that hits the bench in our shop makes a profit. Furthermore, I know exactly how much profit is in each job. I've done that by building the pricing from the bottom up, so I know where my break-even point is. And then I add on top of that the cost of having me do the repair, as I talked about last time. And then, of course, you build in for future expenses, growth of the shop and what have you, and retained earnings. And then on top of that, of course, comes profit. Without going into too many details about how, that for me, and I'm not suggesting everybody has to put on a green eye shade and become a geek. If I have a math problem, a spreadsheet forms out of thin air. If I'm deciding, you know, what to buy, I'll sit down and pull up an Excel thing and decide, you know, what's more cost effective for me. If I'm trying to figure out a problem in terms of logistics, in terms of money, what something costs me, whether or not I'm going to go into debt for something, which I don't, or, you know, whether or not something's worth financing or something's worth, you know, or if I'm looking at a new space for my shop, I want to know exactly what all of the costs are beforehand. And I'm a geek that way. I don't mind numbers. I actually like them. And I like working with them. So for me, working in such a way where I'm able to determine how much profit is in a particular job, not only that, after the fact, I can look back at a job and very easily, in a matter of moments, tell you how much money I made on that job above my expenses, how much profit was in that job, if I was able to increase my profit margin for a particular job on average and what have you. And that formula already exists in the spreadsheet that we loaded from last time, because that gives you your per hour expense rate that's in your shop. And you also have a per hour bench rate, which is depending on your formula for how much time you're at the bench versus doing non-profitable things or non-productive things. You know, that gives you, if you sit long enough staring at those numbers, you'll see the profit margin in each job. So for me, it's a matter of calculating that. I'm not suggesting everybody has to do that, but if you're not running your business with an eye towards knowing what that number is, or coming to it in some way, form, or fashion, you have a hobby that you make money at. Because if you get to the end of the month and pull up your phone and say, can I get this pizza if there's enough money in the account? That's not a business plan. Or if, I'd like to buy whatever new tool is I've got my eye on, and if you need to pull up your checking account to find out if you have enough money to pull the trigger on that tool yet, you're not following a business plan that involves being profitable. What you do with that profit is up to you, whether you want to take it home and it becomes part of your income, whether you want to reinvest it in your business, whether you want to, splurge on a new CNC machine or whatever. It's all a matter of knowing what those numbers are. You don't necessarily have to be an accountant to do that. In fact, there are people who don't want to do the numbers, so they'll hire an accountant to do it for them. You have somebody keep your books for you. So, if you have the idea that you're an artistic type and don't really want to spend that much money behind a computer crunching numbers, you can certainly hire somebody to do that for you, but by the same token, there's an incumbent responsibility on you as the business owner to then sit down with that individual and say, how am I doing? Am I making money? Where am I not making money? So you still have to know the numbers, even if it's not you who's crunching the numbers. And I want to kind of go around the table here now and talk about the different circumstances that we find ourselves in, because we have three very different business models: a music store, an independent Luth who's doing repairs and some building, and then Michael, of course, who's doing just building. How each one of you think about that, or whether you do think about it, are you conscious of how much money there is at the end of the month, or vice versa, as you're approaching your business affairs? Who wants to go first?
I'll jump in.
Okay.
Yeah, I've gone the route of crunching the numbers myself, as well as hiring outside accountants. And I've had different scenarios going on where I've had people on payroll. These days, when I do have somebody work with me, I get them to be independent contractors. I'm up in Canada, and I can't speak to how that looks like tax-wise down in the States, but it's easier as an employer just to pay out a contractor, and I get them to invoice me for GST, which is one of the taxes we have to pay, and that's a write-off for me, and I can write off their wages, and I don't have to then pay their payroll tax if they're a contractor versus an employee. So I don't know. I do pay attention to it, and I'm constantly trying to get a better grip on it. When I have contracted out the accounting work, I haven't found that they did any bit of a better job than I did. So I've gone back to doing it myself again.
Let me ask you a question about that, because
Sure.
I've had accountants.
Yeah.
And my relationship with most accountants was going to them with the paperwork, once a quarter and saying, here, is this right? Just do the math for me and make sure my math isn't. And they would look over, and they'd, of course, look over me and say, how did you learn how to do this? And I just learned by doing it and making mistakes. But my question is this: for somebody who's been through using accountants, where you basically just hand over the box and let them do all the crunching, and then you sat there late nights, with the rest of the shop lights off, staring into the dull glow of a computer screen. When you had the accountant running the numbers for you, was there any analysis that was taking place, or was just here, sign there, and fill this out, and sign that?
There was never as much analysis as I was hoping for. I've tried 4 different accountants over the years, from a bookkeeper to a CA to a CGA, which are different designations in Canada. CA is a chartered accountant. They're the big fancy ones. A CGA is a chartered general accountant, which they're kind of like a lower level accountant. And then there's a bookkeeper who would, not have the designation. And I've tried all of them, and I've gone to each one of them with, okay, here's the last couple of years of my tax returns. This is what's going on this year. I'm looking for advice in this regard because I wanted help with planning. Like what should I be planning for? Like what should I be having as a profit at the end of the day, or like being able to funnel back into the business for buying tools or buying new supplies, or and I never, they always said, oh yeah, no problem, we'll take care of this year's tax return, then we'll talk about the planning. And they never did.
Right.
And I found it very frustrating. And that's why I tried so many different types of accountants.
Right.
And in all honesty, like I never took a business course. I always intended to. And then, boom, here I am just running a business without the training for it, which is not necessarily like my personality type. I like to be prepared, but
right.
I do feel like sometimes I'm just flying by the seat of my pants with the business, because the guitars go out the door before anything, and then I deal with the paperwork afterwards. But yeah, it's interesting, like you go into business for yourself and you're actually a tax collector for the government.
Well, yeah, there is part of that. You are
a strange scenario.
Yeah, I think,
Yeah.
and I think there's a lot of truth to what you're saying in terms of, there are other people who may have a different experience, but very often the relationship between a business owner and their accountant, which should be a two-way street,
Yeah.
very often winds up being the business owner and their data entry person is what the accountant devolves into, is somebody who just fills out the forms and files them. And of course, New York State, which is, the center of the universe when it comes to taxes you can't possibly understand. It's good to have accountants that you can call up and say, I have no idea what a computer motor transport excommunication tax is, or whatever, whatever they come up with next month. But I do think that there's a disconnect very often when you let somebody else crunch the numbers for you, that there are a lot of questions that come up from crunching numbers going, why is that happening? And how do I fix it? Whether it's an expense issue or what have you. I understand. I want to jump over to Michael, because I've heard Michael address this before, where he has said things like he doesn't like to crunch. If I'm not mistaken, you said you don't like to crunch the numbers, so you hire somebody else to do it for you. Is that true? Did I hear you?
Yeah, I have a full service bookkeeper, or excuse me, accountant. They do my bookkeeping, they do all of my accounting, they do all of my taxes, business taxes, personal taxes, and so that's my relationship with my accountant. So, and it hasn't always been smooth. There's definitely been some surprises come tax time, but I also feel like, especially when it comes to the taxes, because I was advised by the accountant to incorporate many years ago, and so that complicates your tax situation. I have to do quarterly filings.
You have to do quarterly filings. You have to file the business taxes in March and your personal taxes in April.
Yeah, and so ultimately, that was all under the idea that based on my income, I made enough to justify incorporating, because it would save me money on my taxes and offset all the extra accounting fees. So now keep in mind, I got that advice from an accountant.
From an accountant.
Yeah.
Michael, can you Can you really quick, just out of curiosity, and if you don't feel like answering that, that's fine too. But what does it cost to get like a full service accountant like that and to incorporate? What kind of cut off the top is that?
Oh, well, I'm going to leave off the cost of incorporating for a minute, but I think, like roughly I pay my accountant about, I think around 2,500 a year. That includes my business taxes, but doesn't include my personal taxes. And then they also do, because I'm incorporated, I'm an employee of my own company. It gets a little weird, so I have to uh, write myself a paycheck every month and use a payroll service. So all told, I'd say probably my out-of-pocket expenses are somewhere between 2,500 and low threes for the full service accounting.
Now, when it's tax time, are you showing up with like a box of a shoebox of receipts, or is there some expectation that you're gonna organize this stuff before tax time?
There's no expectation. They have access to all of my accounts. 98% of all the receipts I generate are electronic. So they log into my bank account once a month, look at my expenses. They have me hooked up on a QuickBooks, which they have access to. So if I get a payment, I'll put that in QuickBooks just to say, a deposit for a guitar. But everything else, they just have access. They have access to my credit card, my PayPal account. So they pull all the data from those accounts.
So sorry, Doug, I got a couple questions, but to Nicole's point about getting some advice, from them, are they ever like, hey, what's the deal with the sandpaper here, Michael? Or do they ever like interject and say, hey, we think you're based on your receipts, you're paying yourself too much? Or do they put any guardrails on this for you?
A little bit. I've generally been really pretty well behaved, so I haven't had to justify, a $600 DoorDash expense or, something like that. So occasionally, they'll ask me, for example, what was this check for? And it's not in a sense that they're trying to figure out if I'm doing something nefarious. Mm-hmm. It's just that, I've written the past couple of years, like I'll buy wood from a private individual. Says, well, why did you write this person? What was this $850 check for? Mm-hmm. And then another wood sale was done through Craigslist, and that was a cash only deal. So I had to, I had to do it all cash and explain that to them. So they just want to know the source or of what things are and what they're for. And they've never questioned something I've expensed. There have been times where I've had questions for them, like if I go to a guitar show and I meet with a customer or dealer and go out to dinner and I buy dinner, like, is that an expense? Like, if it is, fine. If it's not, don't put it on the books. So just to try to figure what's up with all of that.
So far, it sounds to me like most of your relationship with your accountants revolve around taxes.
Yes.
Okay.
What about? Nicole's got a question.
I was just going to ask, have they ever given you any advice and said, we're looking at, year over year, have you looked at considering bringing your expense down in this area or seeing if you can, maximize profit this way, or we think it would be advantageous if you set up a certain account? Have they ever given any advice like that?
Yeah, good question. And the answer is no, other than we think you should do this because this will save you taxes, or
So mostly tax.
You need to be paying this much taxes on payroll every single month. So at the end of the year, you don't get a surprise,
Yeah.
What
that
it-
kind of stuff. And honestly, Nicole, the sums of money we're dealing with here are not great. So there's
Yeah.
not a
Oh, yeah,
I know.
I-
I've been on the cusp of the incorporating or like staying unincorporated for many years, and I've asked advice about that as well, and it really always seems like six of one, half dozen of the other.
It
Uh,
does, and I'll say it depends on your locality, of course, because
yeah,
incorporating in the United States is a lot different than incorporating in Canada.
for sure.
We are incorporated. We incorporated in 2002. That was a decision that had less to do with taxes actually, and more to do with liability in our case, because at that time we were moving the business out of our house into a commercial environment where we were in a shopping center. And of course, if you're in a shopping center with lots of other businesses, now have a kind of a target painted on the back of your shirt, at all times. If somebody slips, and slips and falls and breaks their dog's neck, whether they're coming from the dog groomer across the parking lot, they're just going to sue everybody in the shopping center just because that's what lawyers do. So we wanted to be able to separate ourselves from our business with the corporate shield. That was a liability choice on ours. We found later that there were some very marginal advantages from the tax standpoint. We became employees of our corporation. We also are not only employees, but we're shareholders as well. So there's, tax things to juggle. But that's why I'd ask the question about how you deal with it. And I want to come back to Michael briefly, and because I don't want to devolve into a conversation about accountants. But so from the standpoint of thinking about your business in relationship to profit, has your bookkeeping become separated from that?
I'm going to answer that a little different way because here's sort of the constraints that I've imposed upon myself is that I work a maximum of 40 hours a week.
Okay.
It would be rare that I work more than that, and often because of something going on, I'll often find myself working less. And I honestly think that if I were to try and fit, my own bookkeeping or accounting within that 40 hours, I couldn't do it. I wouldn't have enough time at the bench and enough time to answer emails and things like that. So that was an easy decision for me that this is something I need to outsource, because if I don't do it, then I'm not going to be in business. I don't have room for it in terms of my hours. So that's the real driving force. To answer your question a little bit more directly, at this point, my income and expenses are fairly simple because I'm only building. For a particular guitar, I get 3 payments. That's it. I get a deposit, initial deposit, construction deposit, final payment. And so I don't have a huge number of entries, going in and out of my bank account. I'm not, I buy, most of my tools are bought, but I have supplies and things like that. But my, the point is that I keep tabs kind of on my bank account. I know how much money I have, what I can spend, where my credit card is at.
Do you have an appreciation of where the numbers are in the grander picture of things?
Yes. I don't go to my accountant and say, "Can I buy this?"
Well, that's true. I wouldn't expect that you would, because most accountant, it sounds to me like your relationship with your accountant is a one-way street. You're giving them information and they're doing the work of filing for you.
Yeah.
So, but it also seems to me that you've simplified your circumstance in such a way that you have not only less bookkeeping to do, but you also seems that you've framed it in your head in such a way that you have most of the tools that you pretty much need to do what you want to do, with exceptions of something that might come up that you decide to replace or improve. And your expenses are fairly predictable because of the activity is now limited to building guitars. And you have, your planning stage for when you're planning out your build. You know what the costs of the materials and the supplies in order to do that are, and then of course you have your payment structure already laid out from the customer. So it almost sounds to me like, and I was going to say this to the group, is that you don't have to become a green eye shade accountant in order to know whether or not you're in profit. Michael does it just as he described, by using his bank account as his profit and loss statement for all intent and purposes. You have all of the money you make go into that account, all of the expenses for running your business come out of it, and of course, by definition, what's left over equals profit. Are we wrong?
Yeah, you're exactly right, Doug. And what I would add, or to clarify that situation, is every month, out of my business account, I take I pay myself. That's a fixed amount. That goes from my business.
That's required under S Corp rules, is that you keep yourself on salary.
Yeah. And so I have that amount fixed. The accountant said you have to come up with a a reasonable salary for a guitar builder, which I
which defies definition, which means you
yes.
lose the audit.
So I have to make sure there's enough money in my account for that automatic withdrawal. And then every month on top of that, I take a distribution. I write myself a check that's not considered to be salary.
That's an owner.
Yeah. And I put that right into my personal account, and I use that to, fund my extravagant personal life, in terms of groceries and all that other stuff.
Pay for the fuel for the personal jet and all
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
And that's so, I'm the only one taking money out. I generally work pretty much electronically. So like my insurance, is automatically deducted. If I didn't do these auto deducts every month, I would not be very good at making sure every single bill is paid. And the last thing I'll say about this is just that I would want to emphasize that I don't know how much money I have down to the cent or the dollar, or probably even down to the hundreds of dollars. It's more of like, I know that I have enough money to cover my bills, all the auto deducts, and I know that, there's likely a couple $1,000 in there as a buffer if something unexpected comes up.
Sure.
And as long as I don't start losing that buffer, then financially I feel okay. It's not stressing me out.
Sure. Yeah, and that's certainly a different conversation that will be having in the future of what, talking about a safety net. You have this kind of a margin built in for your comfort level that, even though you don't know exactly what the numbers are, you're not, getting in too shallow water to be able to swim it.
Yeah.
Can we get Moses in on this?
Yeah, I'm
okay, cool.
I'm on top of it. I will say before we get to Moses that Michael and I are polar opposites of each other, in the sense that we are incorporated as well, but I choose to do all of our businesses and our personal tax filings myself, just because I got so frustrated over the years of having to deal with accountants who didn't know my business half as well as I did. So I just learned how to do them, So we do all of our quarterly filings, all of our quarterly estimates, all of our payroll taxes, all of our filing for income taxes, both on the personal side and et cetera, sales tax, and we're gonna do a whole segment one of these years on taxes if I can get enough Pepto-Bismol to prepare me for the episode. But you want to say something, Nicole?
I just have a quick question for you, if you don't mind. Sorry, Moses, I want to hear what you have to say too. We haven't got to it yet.
Yeah.
But I just have a quick question. So how often do you sit down and actually do financial work for the business? Do you do that weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, quarterly?
I do it most of it in the moment.
Yeah.
Partially because I discovered this little program called QuickBooks before anybody knew how to spell it back in like 1980. I think it was 86, and I've been using it since. My QuickBooks file is tremendous because I've never archived it because I want to be able to search every transaction all the way back to the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, I had taken the time over the course of time. It's not something I did in a weekend, in a month, or just at a concerted effort. It was just from time to time, I'd sit down with QuickBooks and say, I need to learn how to figure out how this thing can keep my inventory for me. And I, slogged through the program to learn how to do it, or how to create an invoice, or how to create a customer list, or how to create tax accounts, and how to create all of the different things that it can do for you. And so it's just evolved since then. It's a very, very, as far as I'm concerned, it's the only business accounting software out there if you're going to do it yourself, because it gets so granular that you can have it do almost anything you want. But so for me, I actually have QuickBooks set up to be so well automated that generating an invoice, paying taxes, or filing sales tax, or all of that tax stuff is kind of already done for you. Most of it, my personal version of hell is from March 15th through March 1st through April 15th, because that's when the hit parade of taxes come. You have March 15th is your sales tax, your corporate income tax. Then March 20th is your sales tax. Then at the end of March, you're at the end of your quarter. Then you have April 15th is your personal income taxes. Then you have the payroll taxes due, and then et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's just that period of time of the year, it feels like all I'm doing is filing taxes, because as soon as I'm done with one, I turn around and there's another one to do before the 20th, or before the 30th, or before the 31st, or before the 1st, or what have you. But I do have it so well automated that I buy a copy of TurboTax, load it into the computer. I transfer all of the information from QuickBooks over to TurboTax. I spend a couple of hours, making sure the numbers are put where they're supposed to be, and sign it and send it in, write the check and send it in the mail. So for that, it's fairly well automated. Some years taxes take longer than others, especially when they spring something new on you that you have to suddenly learn the definition of what only people in Washington, D.C. can come up with for excuses to charge you more money. And some of it gets very creative. The first year that I'm not going to go into taxes. I want to come up to, don't get me started on taxes. Moses, you have a completely different situation there, because and I'm going to tee it up with a couple of things. We've heard Ian say very, very often that guitar repair is something that is very difficult to have more than two people in the transaction. And in your case, you have a lot of people in this transaction. You have the customer. In fact, you have two customers, because you have the person who owns the guitar, you have the owner of the store, and then you have other people involved in the transaction that are all sharing food off of the same plate, which is the rest of the loots in the shop, who all need to make a living from this bridge reglue or whatever it is. How do you deal with and I'm not really asking more about accounting, because I'm sure that that's the store's responsibility, but I'm sure you have some responsibility in providing that information to the store. But I want to know more about, from the standpoint of record keeping and with an eye towards profit. Do you care about profit as somebody else's employee in the back of the store? Is that something that's driving you?
Of course, if I don't care about that, I don't have a job, right?
Right.
Well, at least my job is not here. It's in a different building somewhere else in town. I'm in a weird situation. I've run my own shop many times in the past.
Mhm.
And so being in here is a very different experience for me. I have in here this like invisible target of what the profitability is. What that means is I know what I am paid. I know what the combo of everyone who is a salaried or hourly employee in the shop, which there's only 2 of us. I know what those combined, I know what that equals. But I don't know how much this shop costs, for example.
Okay. All right.
I have a general idea, but I don't have an exact number. So as to what the, finding my baseline for being profitable is, I have this sort of invented number that I have inferred from little things I've learned over the years as to what it may cost for this business to exist.
Have you ever asked the owners for that information, or do you really not want to?
Yes, many
Okay.
times.
And
And I
they,
generally just get a like, it's around here.
is that because they don't want you to know, or is that because you think they might not know?
I think that I think they know very well.
Okay.
I think that it's just information that they don't want to share for whatever reason. It's their business,
They're playing their cards very close to the
Yeah.
vest. Okay.
Yeah. And despite the fact that they play their cards very close to their chest, they're also very hands off with how things work in the shop. So I've had the luxury of being able to essentially completely revamp how things worked here in order to make a more profitable business. When I took over this area of the business, they let me know that the shop had not been profitable in the past. And I told them I will do everything in my power to make sure that it is profitable. So despite that, I don't have this, I have this like invisible target of what our expenses are and what our margin is. It's there's some stuff I can add up when we order, but in spite of all of that, it's something I take a very serious magnifying glass to. So, most of my guys are 1099 employees. They're private contractors.
Mm-hmm.
So, for all of them, it's a matter of pulling a ticket out, looking at what the job is, doing the job, submitting the ticket, and every 2 weeks they submit a sheet with all their tickets on it, and they get paid for that. But say the customer comes back and says, "Hey, I got a couple of questions about this repair that was done," and that person's a contracted employee, so they're not here. So that means it's my job to talk to that customer.
Right.
So I'm also involved in the repairs that I don't do, which is kind of a weird position to be in a lot of times.
As the foreman of the shop, that puts you in that position.
Yeah, and that's okay. I don't mind. A lot of stuff ends up going through me before it goes to the customer anyways, just so I can get a critical eye on it. When I had my own shop, I feel like I should talk about just get into the having an accountant thing real quick. I had a friend who was an accountant. I asked them if they'd be willing to be my accountant. They offered to do it at a discount for like $200 a month, something like that. I hated the idea of staying late and going over my books every day. I wanted to be able to focus on the work that I was doing, actually generating something of value which is not the best way to look at doing your books, that it's going to cost you money rather than make you money. And I did that in part because I had read a book called The E-Myth.
Gerber, yeah,
Yeah, Michael Gerber wrote that.
fantastic book.
And one of the things it explicitly points out is, hey, do the thing that you're good at. And I didn't feel like I was good at it. I asked this friend of mine to come in and look at the business, and we only ever even had a phone conversation about it, because once I started to lay out about where things were, he was like, it's not that hard. You just need to actually sit and look at your numbers. Your business is small enough that you're going to be throwing $200 away. There's nothing that I can do for you that you can't do for yourself. And in fact, because I don't know the ins and outs of your business, I'm likely to probably hinder you a little bit, because of the fact that I'm going to be just looking at numbers, taking care of it, assuming that you're giving me all of the correct information,
Right.
rather than going through and double checking. So I did my own books the whole time that I had my own shop. For guitars that I build and sell, I still have to deal with those separately. But here in the store, it's very strange.
Are you doing independent work outside of there? You're building guitars outside?
Yeah.
So those are under your own umbrella. You're
Yes.
keeping a separate set of books on those because that's your private individual business. So that's a different thing. We're going to come back to the music store thing, in that model in a little bit. But I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about how, from a numbers standpoint, you can calculate your profit. And I don't want to get all green eye shade on anybody, but there are basically two ways you can calculate or analyze your profit. You can know what your expenses are to run your business, which is the way I do it. And this is primarily with an eye towards the repair shop, because I'm going to come to Michael and Nicole and Moses in their building part of their things and ask about that, because that to me is a different model. But in the repair shop, you either know exactly what your expenses are, and everything obviously above that is profit. That can happen on a grand scale, meaning like a week-to-week, month-to-month scale, where everything goes in the same funnel, and at the end of that period, whether it's a week, whether it's a month, when you look at a profit and loss statement, which could just easily be your bank statement. And I want to stress that you don't have to go all, getting Peachtree accounting software to do this. You have to just obey a few very specific rules, which is every dime you make goes in your business bank account. Every dime you spend comes out of the business bank account. If there's money left over at the month, that equals profit. What you call the transactions, that's a matter of accounting. When I'm writing myself a check, whether I'm calling an owner's draw or my salary, is a matter of accounting. When cash, when a customer comes in and the guy, peels off $500 bills for the $500 repair, that money can't go just in your pocket and you can, we won't tell the government about that. Putting aside ethics, by doing that, you're now robbing from yourself the opportunity to know how healthy your business is. Because that money that goes in your pocket, as it gets spent, whether it gets spent on you personally, you go out to the movies, you buy something at the music store for strings for a customer's, weird, 9.5 string balalaika, because you don't stock them. All of that money is now unaccountable outside of a bunch of receipts that get stuffed in an envelope, but you'll get to the end of that $500 in cash not having an idea where more than half of it went because we're not paying attention to certain aspects of when we just stuff cash into our pocket. Plus, there's now no accounting for it. So if you merely follow the rule of every dime you make in whatever business activity you have goes into your account and every expense comes out of it, your bank does all the work of sending you your profit and loss statement every month. There are other statements to combine with that. If you're using a credit card to run your business, or whether you've got PayPal, or whether you've got other accounts that are, not linked to your business checking account, they still have to funnel through somehow. But in general, if you stick to that one rule, you don't have to do much accounting. You can do it with software like I do with QuickBooks. But the notion of profit, you can calculate it on a periodic basis, weekly, monthly, whatever. I do it on an hourly basis because I know how much money it costs to run my shop every single year. Sometimes it takes looking back at the previous year to plan ahead for the next year. And then I know on average how much time we spend in the shop, how many billable hours we have, how many non-billable hours we have. I also have a little bit of a complication of the fact that there are two of us here. So I'm also accounting for hours that Sharon's spending on guitars as well as I'm spending on guitars in terms of billing them. But if I have a general idea of how many hours the two of us are spending in the shop in a given week, I can then take my expense number, I can divide it by the number of hours we are in a given week, and I have how much it costs me to run my business 1 hour to the next. So if it costs me $100 to run my business every hour, and I make $120, by definition, I have a 20% profit margin. Whatever the numbers are will depend on the results. If it costs me $100 to run my business and I made 98, then I can open a chain of 300 guitar stores and call them Guitar Center. Because for a 10-year period, they ran on a negative 2% profit margin and somehow managed to sell, a great deal of stock on that idea. I don't know how, but that's another conversation entirely. But so the idea there is that we know that if you're spending $100 to run your business and you make $98 an hour, you're not in profit. You're still getting to profit. You're still not making money. The idea then is to increase your profit margin. And we can talk about the activities to do that, but it's a fairly simple concept that I know that when I'm billing, and this goes directly to pricing because of the conversation that I've heard from time to time where somebody says, oh, I don't do those jobs because they're not profitable. Well, then the formula is wrong. I know when I take in a bridge reglue, or I take in a refret, or I take in a brace repair, or I take in just a nut, saddle, and a setup, that the same profit margin is built into every job. That's why I don't care what the job is. If I'm going to do a refret, or if I'm going to replace a pickguard on a Martin, or if I'm going to do a neck reset on a guitar, or what have you, I know what my profit margin is, and I know it's already built into the job the way I priced it. So I'm happy to do the job. Some jobs aren't as fun to do, but for me, there is no such thing as a non-profitable job. If I have a job that hits a bench that's not making money for me, I bid it wrong, I missed stuff at the intake, which we did a whole thing with Dan on the D&D show about intake. But to me, every job has profit in it, and that profit margin can then be massaged through a number of ways, which we'll get to in a minute. So I want to ask the three of you as builders, and Nicole, of course, you can talk to the repair thing as well. But if you're building a guitar, where does profit come in? Michael, let's go to you first, as the sole builder, or as the builder who's just building. Do you know before you build a guitar how much money you're making?
No.
Okay.
The reason I say that is because for me, building a guitar is kind of a gray, wishy-washy process in terms of, I don't know how much time I'm going to be spending with the customer, emailing back and forth, going back and forth on designs. Um, I am constantly trying to revamp my build process and improve it. So I may get an idea in the middle of a build. Oh, I want to, redo this jig. Um, and I also find that, there are certain expenses that are hard to account for. Like, for example, I get a Colton case in, uh, and then do I have the money to buy the Colton case up front right now? Or do I need to put it on the credit card and then float that for a while? And then I have interest on the credit card. Also, a lot of the wood that goes into the guitar, some of these woods I've had for 25 years, and I don't know how much that little stick of spruce cost me, or how to carry those costs forward by storing it for the last 20 years. Um, so it, basically, it comes down to, how much money do I have in my bank account at the end of the month? Um, that's that's how I gauge, how much profit I'm making on a guitar. And then sometimes, it's not wise to do this in a business sense, but I'll spend half a day looking for the right piece of cocobolo to put on the headstock because I'm not finding the color I want. From a business perspective and a profit perspective, if that's your goal, that's just a ridiculous and stupid thing to do. I have tons of cocobolo. It's right here. I grab a piece, I cut it, and I make the headstock. But that's not how I'm finding myself building guitars. So um, I I think I'll stop there because I don't want to. I definitely want to hear what Moses and Nicole have to say about this.
Okay, so for you, it's the broad strokes. It's not, you're not, and it's something I struggle with because back when I was engaging in the activity of building a guitar for somebody, it was first and foremost on my mind, primarily because my business has always been just that to me. It's a business. It was something I like to do. I started this business in 1985, not because I said, I want to open a guitar-related business. I started this business because I was desperately trying to avoid a day job, and eventually it became its own business. But so the struggle I had with it was that I did the calculations of how much profit there was in a guitar. And it was a very difficult experience because I wasn't making guitars at the time that would command the kind of money that they could be profitable. Which is something we'll talk about in the pricing episode when we have a roundtable of builders. But I want to hear from Nicole and Moses as it relates to guitars. When you start a guitar, do you know you're making money on it before you start it?
It depends. So for me, I build electrics and acoustics. And the electrics I find much easier to price out and figure out. And I do have a spreadsheet for when I'm talking to somebody about a custom build. I go through the list of all the details on my spreadsheet. What are we using for fretboard markers? What type of frets are we using? What are we using for nut material? What kind of bridge are we using? All these things. And I just literally list everything out. And I find it really easy to break down the cost of all the materials. And then I feel like for an electric, just the build time itself is so much faster. And it's a lot more predictable. And where I've been trying to time myself, so I'm still trying to figure out the exact profitability of it, like how much time I'm spending at it obviously is going to dictate how much profit I have at the end of the day or lack of profit. You know, and with the electrics, I definitely know I'm making a profit.
Mhm.
But with the acoustics, I look,
Before you go there,
yeah,
and you don't have to give me numbers. I'm not looking for numbers, but if
sure.
I were to ask you, do you know what your margin is on a particular guitar build when it's an electric? Can you look at it and after enough
I'm
say I made X amount percent profit on that guitar?
I'm still figuring it out,
Okay.
because I've only made about 10 of a certain design of electrics that I'm doing. And so, you know, when you're getting to the repeatability, that's where, you know, and the predictability of that repeatability of making another body and another body or another neck and another neck, I find that's where I can start to calculate how much I'm actually making.
Mm.
So I'm still in the process of timing myself out with that. But you know, that is something that I am actively doing. I'm still doing that with a few processes around the shop for repairs as well. I have a whole bunch of just stopwatches and notepads and like lists of different jobs at the bottom, and you know, just this is how long this took me, this is what I was doing, you know. And so I'm actually really trying to get to the nitty-gritty of my, you know, how much money am I making? And I mean, I'm making money, I'm still in business. I do use my bank account kind of as my business statement.
Yeah.
But I also, you know, building into that, I also have two separate accounts that I filter money into from my business account that are still related to the business. One is just purely for business taxes.
Mm-hmm.
So I contribute to that weekly.
Mm-hmm.
And the other one is
So
for,
you do that for the purposes of the fact that you know those taxes are eventually coming due, and you
yeah,
know you have a rough idea of what the percentage of taxes you have on these transactions, and as the money comes in, X percent comes off, goes into that account. So when the tax bill is due, whether it's from filing or from an accountant saying,
yeah,
we got to send this in, um,
that money's
the
sitting
money's
there.
actually there, and you're not panicking to try to figure out where to come up with, because you've already spent the tax money on, you know.
Exactly. Yeah. I spent the tax money like 15, 20 years ago, and it's like a major panic. So didn't want to be in that position again.
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
but it is kind of astonishing, you know, hundreds of dollars every week just going towards taxes.
Sure.
Um and then on top of that, I also have another account where I use that account for buying, like purchasing wood or purchasing tools. So
You have a set percentage of money that you would, and in business, you call that retained earnings, that
yeah,
you set aside to fund the growth of the business so that you're not reaching into your own personal bank account to buy the business equipment.
exactly. I mean, I set up my personal finances. I do that sort of thing anyways, where so I do pay myself weekly from the business. And you know, I have an account for my dog's pet bills that I put money into every week. I have money for the car. So, you know, if I get a vet bill, the money's there. If I have, you know, and so I do the same with the business. And you know, so getting back to the whole, like, do I know if I'm making a profit on the building? For me, it's still new and I'm still trying to figure that out, but I am like I said, I do have spreadsheets for all the expenses of what goes in there. And I'm also currently trying to catalog all the wood that I have in the shop, because I've been, you know, even though I've been primarily repairing for the last 20 plus years, you know, I got into this because I wanted to build. And I look at the building, particularly the acoustic builds, as my art. And so I'm kind of in a fortunate position where it's like the repair side of the business is profitable. And at the moment it's supporting my building habit.
It's subsidized.
Um, but because I want to make the building profitable, and I've seen other builders do this where they've come out with They're like, I'm gonna build like such a good quality acoustic that's affordable. And it's like, you're gonna shoot yourself in the foot because you're not a factory, you know? Like, how can you compete with Martin or Guild or Taylor or Larrivee, you know, when they've automated so many things, you can't compete with that price point. And so for me, you know, I've only made 4 of my own acoustics. Like I've made a lot of other guitars, but I look at my design that I'm doing on my acoustics now as kind of, that's what I consider my work. And I've only made 4 of those. So how do I know if I'm making a profit on those yet when I'm still deciding on like my build methods and features I want to include in there. So I'm still making the jigs every single time I'm make another model, I'll make another couple jigs. Whereas previously I just did those as one off by hand. So I'm not actually, I'm not even going to test how profitable my acoustics are until I have all those jigs complete, because I don't feel like it's an accurate picture. But I'm also trying to aim for the highest price point I can on those acoustics. So eventually I hope the numbers will add up.
Well, let me
You know?
ask you a question about that, because are
Yeah.
the acoustics that you're building now, are they for orders or are they spec guitars?
So far, I've just built what I wanted to build, and then people have bought them. At the moment, what's that? Sorry?
In that sense, you have a little bit of luxury, because you can look at the finished product
Yeah.
in the rear view mirror saying, you know what? I thought that was going to be a $6,000 guitar, but I think I'm going to ask 12 for it because I
Yeah.
get that.
Yeah.
So in
And
that sense, you're not trapped by a contract with an order.
yeah, and you know, I've always liked the idea of building something and then letting whoever likes what that is find it. Do you know what I mean? In that you know, we can say, okay, yeah, you know, like for example, I want a Matty Addy, you know, guitar because it's gonna sound like this, and doesn't necessarily sound like that when you're done, right? Like if somebody's just ordering it. However, that being said, I do have a few orders for acoustics right now and electrics. So, but yeah, I think that I think that going forward, I'll try and keep a couple orders on the books. I don't mind taking orders for electrics because I find they're more predictable. Whereas an acoustic, you know, people I think are more finicky and the price point is higher. So I'm a little cautious about who I would take an order from, like on an acoustic, but I'm happy to just build and let people buy them. So far, you know, I haven't been stuck with any of them so far, so that's good news. And
That is good news.
yeah.
You did, before we go to Moses, you did hold something up for show and tell there for a moment that I want to stress as a super important tool. You held up a clipboard.
Yes.
And it's basically just an information sheet for you to keep track of yourself. You can do it. I used to have, when we had employees, I used to have employees keep their own work sheets like that.
Yeah.
When we tried to embrace technology back in the days that computers looked like big TV sets, we had a computer in the shop, and we had 7 people in the shop, and we had a program that my cousin had written for me at the time, and everybody used it. You put in, it was basically a database program, but everybody put in the work order for whatever they were doing, whatever guitar it was. They just quickly typed in whatever the activity was: reglue bridge, taped fingerboard, replace nut, set up, whatever task was happening on a given guitar. And then they had a control key, control S for start and control T for stop. So they would go over, type in whatever, hit control S, go and do the job, and then they came back to the computer, found their line where they had it, hit control T, and the computer automatically figured out what the difference between those 2 periods of time was, and then filled out the other fields of how much time for a given activity. We did that for years in our shop, so I had a comfort and confidence in knowing what the average time of a refret was, what the average time of a bridge reglue, what the average time of a brace repair, what the average time of almost a level in a crown or a setup or a nut or a saddle, you name it. Sometimes the average was a pretty broad average, you know. I mean, if you average, 5 minutes together with, 5 hours, that's 2.5 hours, and it's not reflective of either if you only have two pieces of information in your sample. But if you have, what we did at the time, we did that for a few years. We had countless mountains of evidence of how much each job took. So I was confidently able to come up with the average time for each job, so I can set my pricing in such a way. Like I said, the way I do it is based on an hourly basis, so I know my burn rate and my profit margin rate. So when I bill out a job, if I'm billing it out at 6 hours, I know that there are 6 hours of my profit margin built into that job. But that sheet that you held up is all important for you to do your own kind of discovery in your own shops about how long these projects take,
Yeah.
so that you're able to bid confidently, you're able to calculate confidently, whether you're doing it by the hour, whether you're doing it in the broad strokes like Michael is doing. He's already has a he seems to me that Michael has a very systematic approach to his business model that is preset. So that's capped at 40 hours a week, like you said before. He has all of these things set up in such a way where that part of the business is on autopilot, and he can concentrate on finding the right piece of bingo. I think that's a wonderful fit for him. I think that's fantastic. I want to come up to Moses.
I got a question for you, Doug.
You got a question for me?
Yeah. So Michael, capping his hours at 40 hours a week. You previously mentioned you do all of your bookkeeping. What is the length of your typical workday? How many days a week are you working? Just so people can get an idea of the two ends of the spectrum.
Well, I've been a 7-day-a-week man for as long as I can remember, just because I'm a workaholic in that sense. I just, I'm happy when I'm at work. I'm happy when I'm swinging a fret hammer, and et cetera, et cetera. To me, running a business has always been kind of, I joke with every money manager that owns, more expensive guitars than I could ever hope to own. And they show up for guitar repairs, these Wall Street guys who show up with, D'Acquistos and all of these wonderful guitars, and, I'll say, what, this joke breaks down the barriers, by the way, for those customers. And I'll joke with them. I said, you and I are soulmates in a sense, but we're polar opposites. He'd say, how? I said, you're a money guy and guitar is your hobby. I said, I'm a guitar guy and money's my hobby. So, in that sense, running my business has always been kind of a hobby for me. So, it was, if I was doing the books at night, trying to figure out how to make something work more profitably, or finding out if I was profitable, or doing that kind of stuff. So I've been a 7-day-a-week man for a long time. It would not be unusual for me to have easily a 10-hour workday, sometimes 12. I've been trying to dial that back, to be a little bit more reasonable, so if Sharon was with me in the shop and, we're glancing over at the clock and it's approaching 9 o'clock at night and 10 o'clock at night, and, she's curled up on the couch in the office saying, when are we going home? So I'm trying to dial it back so that, that we have a little bit more time to relax with each other. But, so I do have a pretty long work day, but it depends on the week, it depends on the month. There are some weeks that I'm not in the shop a lot, for the first 6 weeks of this year, I wasn't in the shop at all because I was ill. So, then I had 0-hour work weeks. But that, to answer your question, to me, it varies. And it's usually a good minimum of usually an 8 to 10 hour day, and sometimes it stretches beyond that depending on what I feel like doing, But so as it relates to building guitars, when you start a guitar, do you know what you're going to ask for it before you build it? Do you have an idea? Is that part of your equation?
Generally, before I build, I actually, it should be said that I'm not building to any custom orders anymore. For many years, it's just been, I'm going to build what I want to build for my own satisfaction. So with that luxury at the beginning, I can say, okay, I've conceptualized this guitar. Here's the shape I'm going to use. Here's the appointments it's going to have. Here's the wood I'm going to use for it. And I'm going to stick it into this price point. And that means that all of my other materials need to be at a certain area. And that means that I will get, a certain amount of money out of it. So
are you calculating how long the build time as well into that equation? How many hours
estimating, yeah. I try to estimate that, and for a $3,000 guitar, I might be about probably 50, 60 hours into it in total.
Okay.
And that is, I have a large back stock of wood, so that's not something I have to worry about too much.
Do you have an appreciation of what that would cost you to?
Yeah. Not a lot. I've been very fortunate that there's been a lot of folks that have either aged out of their desire to build, or if someone passed, a family member is trying to get rid of a big stock of wood. So I have quite a bit. I have 2 billets of rosewood from the Martin factory from 1971.
Mm-hmm.
In my pile back there, that came from a gigantic stock of wood that I bought that should have cost probably around $5,000 that they asked $300 for, and it was the former builder that offered it to me at that price, and he let me know, hey, I'm very well aware of what this costs, but I'd like for you to have it, so $300. So my wood cost for most of my builds is next to nothing. My general attack for building a guitar, if I'm in that $3,000 price range, I want my entire expenses for materials to be under about $600.
Okay. So
ideally right around $400.
Okay, so you're talking about 15 to 20% material costs.
Yep.
Okay. And then the rest of it, if you're talking about, say, about a 50-hour build, you're probably looking at about a $40 per hour revenue for that guitar. $40 to $50 an hour for revenue for that guitar.
My last build, I got done around 40 hours, and that ended up, I made about $75.
Right, because the shorter your build time, the margin goes up.
And that was a build that I'd done the shape many times. To what Nicole was talking about.
Yeah.
It's a shape I'd done many times. There were a few things that I did differently than I normally would have. For example, I decided for absolutely no reason other than insanity that I wanted to do nibs on the ends of the frets the way that Gibson does, having never done it. And I just thought it would be fun and it was interesting. But that definitely tacked some extra time. So, there's a little bit of freedom with that. Whereas, I think that same thing can translate over to repair when, we've all had a repair that has had a slight hiccup in it. Whether that was a little finish chip or, wood tearing out in a way we didn't expect it to, or, or dripping glue somewhere we didn't want it and having to spend a bunch of time cleaning that up.
Right.
So being able to to have that idea to go through and time yourself. Like Nicole has that checklist or that clipboard, and that's something everyone should be doing. And I feel like, unless you've been doing
That's
it.
something that you're on your guys and your crew about? Or do you look at them and say, well, you're independent contractors, you're getting paid X for this job. If it takes you 14 hours to do it or 14 minutes, that's your problem?
Both
Okay.
is the answer to that. A lot of the 1099 guys, it's if they're moving slow on something, they've chosen to make less money.
Okay.
When I had them all on hourly, I was constantly talking to them about like, time yourselves. Time yourselves when you're doing setups. Time yourselves when you're doing bridge reglues. Time yourselves when you're swapping pickups out of a semi-hollow body, so that you know how much time that's going to take you. And when you get done, take a moment, take a few minutes. It helps me to write these things down, but to actually write down and assess what part of my process took the longest. Did it have to take the longest? Did I have to have that stumbling block? What thing could I be looking for
Mhm.
in the future to avoid that same issue that took up a bunch of my time?
Right. Which is the perfect segue for where I want to go. Because when we're talking about profit, in whether it's in a repair shop or when you're dealing with the building process, there's only I was going to say there's only two sides of the coin to profit, which is revenue and expenses. If you increase your revenue, you'll make more profit as long as your expenses stay the same. Sometimes it may take creating more expenses in order to increase that revenue. Like maybe if you want to increase your revenue by taking on an employee, that obviously increases your expenses because now you have the expensive employee, and presuming that in a fairy tale world that the productivity would actually increase by engaging in that activity, you would by definition make more profit from it. The other flip side of that coin is, of course, rather than increasing your revenue, shrinking your expenses. We all do this to a certain degree. Every time Hulu raised their price on their monthly subscription, we went searching for another streaming service that was cheaper because, damn it, I wasn't going to pay $87 a month for Hulu. The same thing happens in our daily business life. If we, open the envelope to the insurance bill and we go, oh my goodness, the liability insurance for the business has kind of jumped through the roof. Call my insurance agent, find out how to get this down. By shrinking your expenses, of course, you're making more profit by spending less rather than earning more. That's simple, basic math that everybody in business hopefully is doing to keep an eye on whether or not they're profitable. And those are traditionally the two sides of the coin that are always talked about. There's how little or more you're spending versus how little or more revenue you're making. And increasing one, meaning the revenue, means larger profits, or shrinking the other, expenses, means more profits, and vice versa. But there's a third side to that coin, which is, of course, productivity. If we can do more in less time, then you're going to make more money by definition. If you're pricing yourself the right way. Like if I look at, refrets, for example, or levels and crowns, just taking a simple level and crown, for example. I went through what feels like ages of constant refinement to the process, because both for me and for my employees, when I had people working in the shop, trying to get that, if it took 3 hours, to get it to 2.5. If it took 2.5 hours, to get it to 2.25. If it took 2.25 to get it to 2, to get it down to an hour and a half, and constantly, we would, and it, in a sense, when I ask somebody about how they go about doing, say, a level on a crown or a refret, it's all about process to us. Well, I tape off in between each fret, then I use such and such color marker to mark over the tops of the frets. Then I take a certain tool and I do this, that, and the other thing with it. And then I go back and I recolor the marker with a different color fret marker, or whatever the case is, and it's all process. And that's all fine and well. And that's the process of performing your craft, what file you use, and we get engaged in that minutia in conversation all the time. For me, it was trying to figure out how much of that I could pull out of the job that was unnecessary energy spent, so I could make the job go quicker and have it take less time. The shorter it took, the more money I made, because the price remained the same for the job, because I priced per the job. If I'm billing out on an average cost of the job at 3 hours and it takes me 2, I've increased my profit margin by 33%. I will never for the life of me, and like I said at the beginning of this is my opinion. I know there are people who do it that way. I don't know how anybody bills a customer with a stopwatch. You know, so I've heard Lutz, and I love them dearly, who've said, you know, I use a stopwatch on each job, and that customer pays for exactly the number of bench hours that their guitar is on my bench. And I think that from a standpoint of selling it, it's certainly a sales pitch to customers. It sounds good and it sounds noble, but that by definition means the better you get at your job, the less money you make as you get quicker at it. And I could never understand that philosophy. For me, by definition, I would hope that the better I get at my job, the more profitable and more money I can make. You know, that's certainly the case in almost any profession you can think of. You know, a Wall Street trader who gets better at his job doesn't make less money because he becomes more efficient at whatever those people do. For me, productivity was always the magic behind Zen. Yes, your hourly rate could go up. That Zen had just mentioned that. Yes, you could decide that your hourly rate goes up as you get quicker, but then you're constantly tagging yourself to an hourly rate that you could then decide that needs to be more profit built into it, but you're constantly then always tagging yourself to an hourly rate and constantly struggling between how efficient you become by how much you charge more for your efficiency, which seems to me like an imbalance. What did Brian say there? I missed that, Brian. You can unmute yourself and say it because it went by too quick for me to read.
Brian says, charging one rate for a job, sometimes it goes great, you're ahead, sometimes it goes sideways and you lose. Each guitar is unique and so are the problems. I think Doug, going back to the charging, to put, like, I think Alan Watsky's also does, he does a timer on everything. And I think his thing is that one of the things is that you kind of amortize out over a lot of customers. You know, the bummer fret job. So you have like a fret job that you get done in 3 hours, and you have one that gives you a lot of trouble and then ideally you price it so that all of those kind of like even out. But it is kind of like, you know, if I was the customer and I was like, hey, you know, like mine went easy, and you know, you charged me $800,
Yeah,
like it went hard.
Exactly. I've always struggled with the concept that, you know, most of your customers live within a region to each other, and you never know who's going to meet who at the Over 50 Guitar Club at Sam Ash. And, you know, say, oh, you know, that's a great guitar there. Yeah, I just had it fretted by this guy, Doug Proper, up in, oh, yeah, Doug works on all my guitars. Yeah, this was the best $300 I ever spent. Wait a minute. He charged me $680 to refret my guitar. Now I have 2 customers that I'll never speak to again. That's my problem with billing for the particular job. That, for me, is something I never want to have to face up against. Yes, Brian's right. Every guitar is different. But I price things based on an amortized price so that there's profit built into every job. And say over the course of 10 refrets, I might have some of them that take a little bit longer than the average, and might have a bunch of them that take a little bit shorter than the average. But at the end, it all kind of comes out in the wash. That's where that's where I let things kind of amortize themselves. By the same token, I've been doing this for a very long time. It does not take me 6 hours to refret a guitar. It hasn't taken me 6 hours to refret a guitar probably in almost 25 years. So the faster I get at my job, my refrets are typically running 2 to 2.5 hours, maybe 3 at the most. They're still at a 6-hour rate because that's what I've decided is for my business model, for the expense rate, for the cost of running our business per hour and the average cost of repairs, I've decided it's a 6-hour job. And that, for everybody, just so everybody knows, at the last Loothing for Dollars segment, we did post, everything I have is out in the open. I posted my entire rate sheet on the Luth Group website for everybody to go take a look at, and it's all listed there, the average rate and length of time for jobs. So for me, like I said, I understand how some people do things and why some people do things. Yes, the average, not every guitar is the same, and sometimes they take longer and sometimes they take less. If you plan carefully in your business model, you don't have to play the game where that customer's guitar refret was $800 and that one was $300, and you hope that they never meet at the grocery store, at the checkout line, and find out that they're both your customers. So that's
and Doug, I couldn't find the unmute button, so I think it's a very valid point that the faster that you get at something, if you're just charging by a stopwatch, you're cheating yourself. But I mean, I've wrestled with this over 25 years, and I'm not doing this 40 hours a week to make my living. But as I get back into it, after almost 30 years, I feel like you're going to pay me however long it takes. And that's, on my most recent repair, not even the reality, but I've, went off of an idea that, well, a nut replacement should be 60 minutes or 90 minutes. And I've had, guitars, I've had to but I've had to cut through polyester, and it's taken me 45 minutes to get that nut out of there before I even start making it. So why am I charging that person? So everybody's got to decide it for yourself.
of course, yeah.
I struggle with the idea of, I don't worry about if they're going to go talk to each other and say, well, mine costs 300, mine costs 600. I feel like it's my obligation to let them know that this refret is more complex than other refrets, but everybody's got to do it their own way. I couldn't find my mute button when I wanted to answer.
Okay. Yeah, and I said, and I wanted I want to stress that when I said at the beginning that these are, when I'm talking about this, these are my opinions about how I run this. Everybody has to make decisions on how they sit comfortable with them. I just want these environments to be an area where we're talking about it consciously, so whether you're on, Michael Bashkin's perspective, which is, like I said, polar opposite of where I sit in terms of whether it's accounting or all of those aspects of calculating profit and all of that thing. Everybody has to find whatever suits their personality, whatever suits the way they want to work, and whatever they see as fits their set of circumstances. But before we go roundtable again, I did want to stress the other aspect of productivity is that you want to balance your workflow. It has been probably close to 30 years since I've refretted a guitar from start to finish for any customer. I typically, when we're cranking with our usual volume of repairs that we've had for the last number of decades, I have never been refretting. Typically, I'm usually fretting about 20 to 30 guitars at once. That sounds like an impossibility. But if you break the job down to tasks, There's pulling the frets. There's cleaning out pulling the frets and cleaning out the slots, which is one step to me. There's truing or planing the fingerboard and polishing the fingerboard when you're done. There's cutting the depth of the fret slots before the frets go in. There's choosing and cutting fret wire. Then there's installing frets. Then there's, then the job basically becomes a level and a crown. So I keep, if I could just grab them. And so for me, I can't remember the last time I fretted a guitar from start to finish. I typically have 20 to 30 refrets going on at the same time. They happen kind of in batches where I'm a kind of a one-person assembly line where the guitar changes in front of me for a number of guitars. It might not be all 30, but when it's, time to clean out the fret slots, the last thing in the world I want to do is think about going into the tool room, setting up the Fordham tool, measuring getting the right bit in there, getting the depth set, getting all of the, plugging everything in, sitting there and zipping through one set of frets, and then putting all of that shit away and cleaning up the area to go do the next part of the job. I stack repairs in such a way where I've got 20 or 30, in your shop it might be 3 or 5, in such a way that when I'm doing that task to a number of guitars. And I've had, and by the way, these lists that I was talking about, they're just on a clipboard, they look like that. They usually go, a couple of pages or 3 deep. They're lists of all of the repairs that are at that stage of a refret. They have the work order number, the customer's name. They have little columns that say pull frets, level board, cut slots, install frets, move to next clipboard, which is this one, which is the fret level and crown clipboard, which is separate from this, because every refret eventually becomes a fret level and crown. There are also guitars on this list that are not here because the guitar came in just with pitted frets or uneven frets, or it's just a level and a crown, so it goes right to this list without obviously having all of this done to it. And that's the way I juggle levels and crowns and refrets running through the shop. So I can look, and this guitar would have had its frets pulled, then I'll go to that guitar, pull its frets, pull its frets, pull its frets, pull its frets. And I may get 6 guitars in, or Sharon would be pulling 6 guitars in, and she'll decide, okay, I'm done for now, and she'll stop. And that's where all the check marks go up to. So I can then go to the list and say, okay, we've got those number of guitars that are ready for the next step, and I might choose to go to the next step. And then she sees where I checked off, and then when she's back at her bench, she'll go consult the list and see what 10 guitars are ready for what step. And she sets herself up for that job, and this does require a little bit of training for customers, because all 30 people's guitars are going to take longer than if I just did one refret. Yeah, I can do one person's refret, sit at the bench, do that job, step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, and have it done in 2 or 3 days, or 1 or 2 days if I'm really moving quick. Or in some days you can even fret a guitar and get it back to the customer in the same day if they're that anxious for it. But I don't want to be the 30th person on that list who's waiting for me to complete 29 guitars before I start theirs. Of course, the counter argument to that is then don't have 30 guitars in your shop. I am also a little bit of a counterintuitive. I know there are people who get very uncomfortable when a certain number of guitars over X. Oh, I get super uncomfortable when there's more than 14 guitars in my shop. Or I never want to have more than 6 guitars on the wall at the time. Or I don't want to have more than 2 weeks worth of work in the shop at any given time, or whatever the business model is. I look at it on the flip side, that there's great comfort and virtue in a backlog. Because those months of the year that get lean because everybody's in the Bahamas and you've run out of all the guitars in the house to fix, and it's the end of summer or the beginning of the school year, and everybody's worried about new school uniforms and new clothes and sneakers and school supplies, and the guitar repair is not the first, having their guitar repaired is not the first thing on their mind. That's when things get uncomfortable with having to worry about revenue. Like I said, there are two sides to it: revenue and expenses. If there's a decent sized backlog there, you got plenty to do even during the lead times. I haven't, for the most part, for the last 39 years, we haven't noticed any of the recessions that have happened in the United States, because there was always plenty of work to do in-house. That backlog may have kind of shrunken down to the point where you look over and go, oh, there's a lot of holes between the cases over there, but it eventually filled up again. And we never got to the point where we were pulling the last case off the shelf. But there is virtue in a backlog to that. So the way I look at it, getting back to the productivity standpoint, is I like to bundle my work. I like to have groups of refrets running through. I won't make a nut for a guitar unless I've got 6 guitars that are ready for its nut. That might mean that 4 or 5 guitars are waiting for me to finish that refret so I can make the nut at the end of the refret, or that there's a bunch of guitars in the tool room waiting for their nut or saddle when I've got refrets and neck resets all kind of converging on that point. But I want to be able to go in there and make 5, 6, 7 nuts at a time, or 10, so that I can bundle and make each job more profitable. So I want to go a little bit round robin and talk about how you guys choose to increase your productivity.
Nicole. I just wanted to address what Brian was saying earlier as well, like where you might come across a guitar where it's gonna take that much longer to make a new nut because it's covered in poly or whatever, right? Jobs like that, I do everything a la carte, similar to Doug, and I build a profit into every single one of my prices, and that includes parts as well. But when I can see something on an intake, and I schedule everything by appointment, so all my customers are by appointment. That is part of like productivity for me, so I'm not interrupted. And I can just focus on work. And these days I kind of keep my appointments to maybe 1 or 2 days a week, and that's it. And so I can plan out my week's worth of work and not get interrupted. And sometimes I'll batch things like Doug is saying, but I would do a smaller batch, like somewhere between 3 to 5, even though I do keep about 80 or 90 guitars in the shop at any given time. And I have a wait list for people to even get an appointment. My wait list has been 6 to 12 months. And then when somebody comes into the shop, I always set a deadline. So then again, I'm being more efficient with even communication, where it's like, I don't have to call somebody when I finish the job because we've already set up a deadline. So I don't have to try and get a hold of them. What time works for you, this and that. So that's just another efficiency that I've tried to build in. And I feel like for me, it's a constant evolution. But getting back to what Brian was saying, when I do that intake and I have that appointment with that customer, I look over everything. So if I can see that nut is going to be a pain in the butt to get off, I will say to the customer, this is how much it costs for me to build you a new nut. This is how much the material costs. But I can see that this is an issue here that's going to take more time. So I'm actually going to put a line item on the written quote to say extra time for this, and there's a question mark. So then I'm doing the work based on what my like the job is costs. But then if I can see that there's extra work that will be done, I will tag that onto that customer's bill as well. So it's kind of like,
and you just warn them that this is extra time and this is going to be an upcharge.
Exactly, because your guitar is more complicated. You know, there's this complicating factor on your guitar. I can see it right there. This is the normal cost of the job, so I'm gonna have to charge you more for that.
Right.
And we'll see what that is. And I do keep track of time that way. So I guess I kind of do a bit of both, but
Right.
I do lean towards more just the price per job, because the more efficient I get, I should profit from.
Right,
You
exactly.
know what I mean? And that's how I look at that. So yeah, but
Well,
I think
yeah.
I think it is possible to charge uh per the type of job, and with, you know, if you see extenuating circumstances in jobs, I think it is possible, as long as you're just like constantly raising your rates. Like if you're getting better
Yeah.
and you're like, hey, I'm still going to charge a la carte, but I'm not a $50 an hour Luth anymore. I'm $100 an hour Luth. You know, as long as you're taking that, you're figuring it out that way. I think it can work to where you're not shortchanging yourself. But
that's true. I mean, you can build profit into an hourly rate. But then, and that's true. I mean, you can say, oh, I'm a $100 Luth now, or I'm a $120 Luth, or whatever you feel wherever you feel you are in the hierarchy of your expertise or the quality of the work that you're performing, and then just bill at an hourly rate for however long it takes you. But then there's no incentive to become more efficient, in my estimation. You're then always just married to a certain margin. And I've used the math before to demonstrate. If you take just a simple nut, I bill a nut because we bill profit I have our expense rate, and then what we have above that, factoring in what we cost the business in terms of our salaries, and then building for profit, and not for profit, but retained earnings, taxes, and growth, all in our hourly rate. And I actually don't calculate rate into that model. That's my rate. And then I add profit to each job by adding 33% more time. So the reason why a refret is 6 hours on the books is because I know my average refret time is 4 hours. Now my incentive to get quicker than the 4 hours just builds in more profit to what is already there. But let's say, for example, a nut. My billable rate for a nut is at an hour and a half. It's an hour and 30 minutes. That's because we all kind of base this idea that a nut takes about an hour to make. I guess it depends on if you're doing it with hand tools or belt sanders or not. But that's kind of the industry standard. Everybody, says, well, how much an hour do you charge? Or how much an hour should I charge? An experienced Luth will always answer the question with a question. How much do you charge for a nut? Oh, $75. That's your hourly rate. And that, for some reason, has been a benchmark in our industry for a very long time, so I'll use that as an example. If I charge $100 for a nut, and it takes me an hour to do, I make $100 for that hour. If I learn how to be efficient, do things like stack my work where I'm working on more than one nut at a time, and refine my process so my process becomes quicker by cutting out what I call the fat of, not spending time doing things that I don't need to do. I won't go. We did an entire episode on nuts, and I went through my process for making nuts on the Dan and Doug show, start to finish. So I won't go through it here. But just as an example, with refrets or levels and crowns, I no longer tape off the entire fingerboard because I found out it takes a long time to tape off the whole goddamn fingerboard. And if I cut that out and just took 2 pieces of tape and put them on the sides of the fret, crown the fret, and then move that piece of tape over to the next fret and over to the next fret, I also found out I can get 6 or 7 frets out of 2 pieces of tape. And not only was I saving money on tape, which sounds like I'm bean counting, but I am, but I also became more efficient because I wasn't spending time just putting tape on an entire fingerboard and have to go back to the end of the fingerboard and then start crowning, and then, areas where I burned through the tape, had to stop and put more tape on it. It just adds time, which also means I don't have to go back and take all of the tape off of the fingerboard all the way up the fingerboard. And if I didn't get all the way through the frets before something happened and it's making me go out of the shop for a day or whatever, like at the end of the day, if somebody calls and says, well, like I got a phone call once at the shop where my landlord said, I was driving by your house and there's huge pillars of smoke coming out of the windows. So, okay, it's time to close the shop and go home, you know? But if I was right in the middle of a fret job, then I'm leaving the shop with the guitar all taped up, and I might come back tomorrow to find out the problems with the tape, which now I have to remove the tape and put fresh tape on. I was cutting as much as I could out of the process that was unnecessary, that felt more like procedure than it was making the work come out the way I wanted. I was refining my process and keeping in such a way where I was keeping the quality up at the same time. That's just an example with the tape, or say with the nuts. But if I have a nut that I'm charging an hour to do, and I can make 2 nuts in the same hour because I can reduce the amount of time it takes me to make that nut, then I've doubled how much I can make in an hour. And then if I can trim that down by another 20%, that means I can squeeze another nut in that hour. I'm currently, and I do this with every job I do, every refret I try to get a little bit, I play a game with myself because this is not exactly challenging work for the mind when we're crowning 22 frets. So I constantly play games with myself where I'll see if I can beat my personal best in terms of time and quality for each job, for each nut. And this is 39 years in, I'm still doing it. And so for me, when I stack nuts or saddles or refrets in that fashion, I can go into the nut, and my personal, where I am benchmark for myself that I'm trying to break is I'm trying to break from 5 nuts in an hour to 6. So if I do the math and I charge, say if that was $100 for a nut, and I can get 6 nuts done or 5 nuts done in an hour, now I'm making $500 for an hour. My expense rate hasn't changed. So at that rate, I'm making both my lawyer, my doctor, and my accountant jealous with my hourly rate. So the whole idea there is that by increasing efficiency, I can make more and more profit in the process. I don't know if that translates. I know it does in manufacturing, and manufacturers are, of course, obsessed with it. Every second of a guitar build in a company like Martin or Gibson is virtually accounted for. And if you can cut down the build time for a guitar in those settings by 3 minutes, you get the employee of the month in the closest parking space to the building that month.
Funny story about that, Doug, is before all of this, I went to college for woodworking, and I took a 2-year program, and part of one of the optional classes was actually called shop management. So it deals with workflow and efficiencies and ergonomics and things like that. And when I did work at Laravel, I did a number of workflow studies and presented them to Jean and was like, hey, Jean, if we change this one process in kerfing, we could save 90 grand a year. He's like, that's nice, Nicole. And I'm like, okay, wait. We could change this in side bending, and that's 130 grand. He's like, uh-huh. And then that's when he's like, why don't you go to the repair department? He's like, go fix something over there. So anyways, just funny story, but yeah. And naturally I find that I'm doing the same thing where the more efficient you can be, the more profit you make, right? So
exactly.
Yeah.
Now my curiosity is does that mindset have a space to live in the single guitar builder's world? You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
I'm asking the question.
I think it has to. I mean, for me, like I said, my approach with my acoustic guitars and building those single ones,
Mhm.
I'm not timing myself yet. I'm not looking for profitability at the moment in that because I'm still refining my process. So
In theory, then
one,
you would call that being in the R&D stage.
yeah, I guess so. And for me, until I have that down, I mean, I can't improve upon what I can't measure. You know what I mean? So
If you're still jigging up, if
yeah,
you're still refining your process, if you were a much larger company, that would be called the R&D department. And in
yeah,
which case, dollars go to die because nobody expects the R&D department
to make any money.
to be
Yeah.
profitable from one day or 1 week or 1 month to the next. But they do expect that department to be the refinement of where the process and the rest of the factory would be in theory. You know, I don't know how much, I've never spent any time in my life outside of just being a visitor in any guitar manufacturing setting. There are other people here who could speak to that. I know from my experience working in defense electronics in a manufacturing setting that there was a constant near obsession with how many minutes a unit would spend in such and such a department, whether it was paint, the IC lab, data testing, whatever. Every second was counted. And if a tray with an electronic component in it spent, you know, a minute and a half too long at somebody's bench, there were sirens and red lights that went off in the building, practically. But from a single builder's standpoint, and let me ask Michael, as the only person in the panel who's just building at the moment, does your efficiency, does that play a part in your psyche of your building process, or is it mostly art?
No, it plays a huge role. And I like to think that I use the efficiency to make space for the more artistic side.
I was hoping you were going to say that. Can you spend a little time, because you did a whole thing on this at Northwoods, and I was hoping you would go there. Can you spend a little time talking about the relationship between those two parts of
Sure.
the art?
So basically, you know, once you get to a point where you have your design more or less down, this is the size of my neck block, this is what my end blocks look like, etc. Um, I I noticed certain things on my guitars were repeatable. My back bracing was the same, and so basically anything that was fixed that was repeatable on a guitar, I tried to get out of the single builder mindset, like one guitar at a time, and do those things in multiples. You know, set up once. All right, I'm going to make back braces, but I'm going to make them for 20 guitars. And if I take the time on the CNC to make, you know, blocks, then I'm going to make blocks for 20 guitars. And um, and then I jigged up like the back bracing design on most of my guitars is pretty much the same. So that is kind of a very jigged up process. And so those are the things where I felt like, as you use the word, you know, I tried to trim the fat out of to eliminate setup time by doing multiples, also eliminating cleanup time, you know, etc. And when I found that I took those things, every process in the guitar where I was doing the same things over and over, and automating isn't the right word, but getting as efficient as I could at those processes, then my hours dropped way down, and I could afford to, you know, spend 4 hours looking for the right piece of cocobolo on a headstock without, you know, and staying in business. So
So you had a very elegant way, I'm trying to remember what it was, but you had a very elegant way of describing that relationship when I heard you speak up in Northwoods. Do you remember what it was?
yeah, that was inspired by a book written by David Pye. I think it's kind of script the title, but it's something like The Art and Nature of Craftsmanship. And he defines it in terms of um, the art of, or excuse me, the process of risk or the process of certainty. And that's how I kind of divided how I thought about my work. So the process of certainty were the things I just described, where I'm going to make braces for 20 guitars, and I want uh, uh, to make it as efficient as possible, remove any variability that I can, and the outcome is fixed and it's certain. And then the process of risk is where I'm doing an inlay by hand or doing designing, and the outcome is can be variable. And so I like having both in my work. Um, uh, I don't find the process of certainty to be unenjoyable. I actually like the challenge, and it feels good to become more efficient at a process. And I certainly like the fact that it helps me with giving me more freedom to put into the processes of risk in my guitars, because not every guitar usually has something different on it, and I want to be able to take the time to do that. So that's kind of how I've set it up. One more thing that I would just want to add is that what I feel like is the biggest threat to this whole model and to everything we've been talking about today,
Mhm.
at least as I've experienced it in my own shop, because I'm the one doing it, is rework and mistakes. Is that they are
Okay.
extremely expensive. They're depressing,
Mhm.
and and so if anything, I try and watch that very carefully, because I certainly make mistakes, and I've made some very costly ones. And there's nothing fun about fixing a mistake at all. So it, I would throw that into the mix in terms of profit and profitability.
Sure.
Also about being, uh, trying to reduce your own errors as much as possible.
I think the two of the things that I'd like to um, point out about the things you just said was going back to the first part about the risk versus practical. In essence, you're refining your process of whether it be jigging up, whether it be making, enough braces for 20 guitars and blocks and all of the pre-planned predictable stuff, and you're refining that process, earning you the extra time to allow for the creativity of uh, the activity of risk. Am I characterizing that right? In other words,
Yeah, that's right. And I don't, it doesn't happen on every single guitar, but a lot of times uh, I have like an open customers, give me an open palette to work with, or there's a design I'm thinking about, or I'm thinking about a new bracing pattern, and this gives me a buffer to be able to try those things and feel like I'm still going to be fine on the guitar. I'm still going to come out ahead. The profit margin will be good. I'm not going to go out of business because I'm trying to think about these things and incorporate it, and just for the sheer uh, joy of it. I'm sure for many of us, working on guitars, building and repair, it's a pretty cool thing, and it's a passion for a lot of us, and it's fun, and I want to keep that fun curiosity involved
mhm,
in my daily work.
okay. And the second part that I thought was invaluable is that um, obviously mistakes happen and they're costly because nobody, we've all been there where, you're either you're inexperienced or your carelessness or not thinking too far ahead on a job or just trying to get through the mechanical part of doing a job, You didn't stop to take the time to think. We've all been there where we've thrown a guitar on the bench, put the frets in, might be a Les Paul, not that I'd know, but it might be a Les Paul, and you get to the end of it and you go to adjust the truss rod and realize the truss rod's completely loose and the guitar is now in a back bow because you didn't necessarily choose the best fret wire for that slot. Now I've got a Les Paul with an ebony fingerboard that I have to pull all the frets out of because I didn't plan ahead for the job. That's costly. Nobody likes having to go and pull all those frets out and refret a guitar because now we've got double the amount of time in the job. We know we're losing money on it. We know we're behind on the guitar behind it that was supposed to be done after we did that Les Paul. It's got, it's got hazard written all over that job, and those are the jobs that as Ian would describe, go sideways and, cost and can ruin your week. It's easy to say, don't make mistakes. How does that translate into the real world? Is it the season of experience that tells you to take a beat and make sure that it's the right process, or is it the discipline of taking the time to think and plan out the job? What is it? I mean, because it's easy to say don't make mistakes because they're costly, but what is it? What is it in the process that you think?
Yeah, well, for me, I would describe it as a personal culture and discipline. Like, I'm not the neatest person, and I've been challenged over the years to keep my bench clean and my workspace safe for guitars. And I've made mistakes where I've put a dent or a scratch in a guitar, and it was doing that and learning the hard lesson that I had to kind of teach myself basically, well, I don't want to do that again. So what do I need to change? Okay, every time I need to clean the bench, I changed my workshop in that I don't have any tools on the wall in front of my bench. So I'm never reaching over a guitar, grabbing a tool, things like that.
But you're
So
including in that. You're including mistakes and accidents kind of in the same.
yes, yeah,
Okay.
and there's different categories. Uh, some mistakes are careless and could and should be avoided. Other mistakes are maybe just because, well, I didn't know. Like, I wanted to try something new, and screw it, I'm going to try it, and it didn't work out,
Right.
or things like that. So, for me, I guess it's my own personal. I feel like for me, it's a culture in the shop that I try and have about my work to reduce mistakes, and then also how to deal with the mistakes is very important.
Mm-hmm.
This is things we've talked about on the Luth group before. Um, are you going to spend the time beating yourself up about it, or thinking of ways to fix it? How do you get over the shame and the embarrassment and get on with the work and move forward? And I will freely admit that hasn't always been easy for me. So
Getting to the nut of what I'm asking about. So it's a mindset of avoiding mistakes and accidents that you're bringing to the bench. It's a reminder to yourself. It's more than just, don't make mistakes.
yeah, right. It's like when you're a kid and you go and you touch the stove.
Right.
You're going to learn your lesson, and I think it can be the same thing with an expensive mistake in the shop.
It's
Uh,
a big sign on the wall that says it's been X days since I messed up somebody's guitar.
so,
But okay, I just wanted to get clarification on what that meant, not make mistakes, because I understand where it comes from. We've all been there, and it's like, it's sometimes it's a process, sometimes it's haste. So reminding yourself that it's never worth rushing on a customer's instrument. You know, I can't tell you how many times I've backed myself right into binding repairs because I was sawing too furiously in between the frets with that stupid saw that has the cutouts in it so that you can cut in between the binding, and you're going too fast and you push the binding off the end of the fingerboard. Now I've got both a binding repair and a finish repair to do, where it was before it was just a refret. You know, so that, you know, I understand don't make mistakes, but it's a reminder or a mindset that when you're approaching the bench, you do so in such a way that you give yourself the best opportunity to keep that from happening.
Yeah, it is for me, and it's probably different for, you know, for everybody. But it's I guess it's a certain amount of just, like you said, your mindset, your vigilance about it, how you approach your work. And there are times where I know, like, all right, today I'm not touching a guitar. I'm just going to clean the shop because I know if I touch a guitar, I'm going to fuck something up.
Right.
You know, like I'm toxic. So, and then so being able for me to recognize those situations, and you know, the shop can always use cleaning and organization, and that's a good way to be productive and stay out of trouble.
Okay, that's cool. That's fair enough. Moses, you want to bite at that apple?
Yeah. I think, at least for me, speaking to that, I frequently find myself when I pull a tool out to go do something on a guitar, asking myself as I'm coming up to the guitar with the tool, what can happen? What can I do wrong here? Now there's a threat there of you paralyzing yourself by analyzing yourself too much. So finding your own sort of threshold about how much you're willing to analyze anything you're about to do. But you know, there's probably been many times that I've avoided damaging something or creating a larger issue for myself by simply looking at the tool, thinking about where the sharp end is, and the motion I'm going to be using it in.
How many people are in the shop right now?
One, two.
I mean, not how many people are there now, but how many people are working in the shop?
I have 5 people that work under me at benches. I have one person that works under me where his job is to essentially do intake and handle a lot of the administrative stuff.
Okay, so you have 6 people in the shop.
Now,
How much of that mindset about, you know, asking yourself those kind of questions as you're approaching the bench comes from having to not, I don't want to use the word be responsible for, but how it comes from having to oversee a number of other people's work?
you know, I think a lot of that mindset for me personally came from just my learning curve. I went to a Lutheran school. When I got out of Lutheran school, they were like, you need to go learn from someone. Told our whole class, you need to go learn from someone. You don't actually know what you're doing. You have the basics of understanding, but you need to go learn from someone. I went and worked for someone in the same shop for about 2 months, and then he opened a second location, and I was left alone. And so for me, I think that mindset was more born out of fear a long time ago, and trying to ensure that I didn't have to have that conversation where I called a customer and said, "Hey, guess what terrible thing I did to your guitar?" And you know, thankfully, I didn't have to have that conversation a bunch of times, but I definitely had to have it quite a few times. And so I think for me personally, it was born more out of that feeling that had been impressed upon me by Chris Olson at Roberto Venn of like, you have basic knowledge and that's great, but you don't actually really know what you're doing until you have enough experience. So that is something that I, you know, anytime there's been someone in my shop that's made a mistake, usually the first question I have for them is, okay, how did that happen? How could that have not happened? So that right off the bat, we're establishing, okay, here's how we can avoid that problem in the future. So
Right.
not an issue you're going to have to deal with. And then let's tackle what we have to do to fix it.
Right.
It's, it can be very dangerous. I mean, be responsible for is the soft way to say it. Like, there are days where it feels like babysitting. There are days where it's like, yeah, you can't just set your soldering iron down like on your bench. You can't just do that. Thankfully, something like that's never happened, but there are times where I feel like I have to say obvious things.
Well, yeah, I think a lot of my mindset about how, not today, how I organize a shop and how I work in a shop, putting aside, the green eye shade for a moment, comes from a time when I had other loots in the shop that I was training. The first time I took a guy who was, originally a shop assistant and then became kind of a setup guy, and then, okay, it's time to learn to make nuts and saddles. And the first time I dragged him into the tool room and started showing him how to make a nut, I was like, okay, now I have to break this down into smaller bite-sized parts so it can make sense, so he can have something that's repeatable. For me, that constant thinking about the process, the repetition, the refinement of the process, the eliminating the fat, for me really started when we started having employees. And that's probably where it was born from, because it was always trying to keep everybody as efficient as possible. So that there was, still enough money at the end of the month or at the end of the week to pay them. When somebody disappears into the tool room and it takes, 6 hours to make a nut, you're not going to be lasting in this job very long. Unless you figure out a way to get that to where it can be under what we're charging the customer for. Because if I'm paying you whatever number of dollars per hour, and the amount of hours you're taking to do that task exceeds the amount that I'm charging the customer for, we got to work on making this more efficient. And that mindset of being in charge of other people's work was probably the thing that got me thinking about it the most. And then, eventually we wound up just being Sharon and I in the shop, because I was a terrible employer.
Yeah, I think the number one thing that all my guys heard me say for the first year and a half was probably, let me know when you get to that point and I'll tell you what to do next.
Mm-hmm.
Because of that necessity to break things down. It doesn't matter how many times I called them into a group and said, okay, here's the thing you're going to learn how to do today. Here are all the steps, explain everything, and then turn around and go, okay, now everyone watch me do it. Make sure you're taking notes, ask any questions you have while we're doing it, go ahead and do the thing, and then go, okay, now everyone's going to watch me do it where I'm not answering any questions, and you can see the speed that I get this done at.
Right.
It doesn't matter. They're still going to have questions.
Right.
So, you have to find that middle ground for yourself of where you're willing to stop yourself and ask questions, or stop yourself and assess what your process is, or stop yourself and assess what potential mistake can arise from what you're about to do. You have to find that threshold of, I'm willing to spend X amount of time and X amount of brain and power working on those things in advance. And then there's a certain amount of cleanup you have to be comfortable with of, all right, well, as to what Michael said, if you get to a point where you go, I'm going to try this new thing, you're making a bargain with yourself of going, okay, I've got to have enough time to also clean up my mess here.
Right.
Which we never do, but we find a way to make it work.
Mm-hmm. I could keep talking for hours, as anybody who knows me will be able to attest to. We've been at this for about 2.5 hours now. So I wanna. Does anybody have any final thoughts about the subject of profit?
I was just going to say one thing.
Go for it.
just you know, kind of just one thing that kind of kept coming to mind when Moses was talking, you know, with the whole like woodworking background thing. My one piece of advice I was given, like, you know, 30 years ago was basically like, if you slip, what will happen? You know what I mean? And so whenever I'm teaching somebody how to do something, I actually tell them this is a common mistake. This is where you can go wrong here. This is where you can go wrong there. So guard against those things. But then, and then this is a separate thing, but getting back to efficiency and whatnot is being organized and having a clean shop. I find is a lot, and I have messy parts of my shop and I have tidy parts of my shop, but I constantly tell myself I don't make any money looking for tools. So I need to know where absolutely everything is. You know, and whenever I have somebody else in my shop, which I do, and I'm training a new person now, but it's like everything has to go back exactly where it was, because there's no money to be made in looking for tools. So, you know, like that's just a simple thing. But you know, you think about like if you can't find something and how much time you spend wasting looking for that, it's like that's just burning, setting fire to money right there. So anyways, I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah.
Same goes for materials as well. If you don't know
Yeah.
where your 1/8 inch saddle blank versus your 3/32 saddle blank is, and you go over and look for it, and it takes you an extra minute to look through your drawers, that might only be a minute per day. Add that up for the year. You know, maybe there's an entire other saddle you could have made because you didn't know which drawer was where. And I lose my mind when my drawers get put back in the wrong place because everything is.
Yeah, we used to have a position when we were a multiple Luth shop. We had a position that we called shop assistant because and it was the only job in the shop that I wasn't concerned about profit because their job didn't exist to produce income. Their job existed to make all the other Luths in the shop faster. So when somebody was going to do a bridge reglue, they were trained on what materials they needed to do and tools and everything else, and they would set that job up for the Luth so that they could just step up to the bench, do the repair, and then when they were done, they would say, hey, you know, Bob, Joe, Nancy, whoever, this is all done, and the shop assistant's job was then to come in, swoop in after they were done, clean everything up, put it away, hone the chisels if they needed to before they put back in the drawer. So this way it was a job that kept the whole shop efficient, and they just were at an hourly rate. It was also, by the way, the position that I had that where we found our best employees that became techs. But I got to tell you, an inexperienced shop assistant would cause more havoc in the shop than, because we, back in there was about three or four shops ago, we had workspaces in the center and tools hanging on the walls away from away from the benches. So there were benches along the walls with tools behind them so that you could do whatever dirty work you were doing on a bench, but the guitars were in the center, like on little hospital bed kind of things, in rows and such. And if a tool got hung on the wall 4 inches over from where it was supposed to be, somebody could be standing there for like 30 minutes looking for it and not see it because it's over here instead of over there. And so, you know, we used to do all sorts of things to prevent that from happening. We used to take pictures of the tool walls and put it on the wall so that to make sure that it looked the same as the picture, you know. But yeah, that kind of thing where you're burning time in the shop, just trying to find out where you put your whatever it is, you know. If you put it back in the wrong place, can really burn up a day, you know. I have spent countless hours looking for this. I've got 11 of them in the drawer, but that I knew this one was missing would drive me crazy. Any other last thoughts?
I will say that on the subject of productivity and profit, the one thing that I've done at this shop and at every shop I've ever had, that I think has made the biggest difference for me, and I know I talked about this in my previous interview, is I schedule a singular or sometimes 2 days per week. In a shop like this, it's 2 days, but typically in the past, it would be 1 day per week. And that is the day that I do setups. It doesn't matter. So here it's Thursdays. If you drop a guitar off on a Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, it doesn't matter. That following Thursday is the day that setup gets done. Worst case scenario, it gets done the following day, Friday. We tell customers it'll be done by that Saturday, but it's pretty much always done that Thursday or that Friday. And that does a couple of things. Number one, that gives everyone this constant understanding that your shop is a place that they can drop a setup and get it back at a specific date in high volume. So I can have someone bring in 4 setups and not have to worry about it. They know they're going to get it back by the Saturday. So that increases the number of people that are going to bring in setups. So now we've increased the bread and butter job. We've increased the job that makes the most money. And so on an average week, we have maybe 20 guitars come in for a setup.
Okay.
And at $80 minimum for a setup, $1,600 per week just in setups. Now, granted, we have a bunch of people here. I generally don't participate in doing the setups. I have bigger fish to fry, but when there are weeks when I have needed to, I can get 9 setups done in a day without feeling like I'm even breaking a sweat.
When
But that is going to.
when you say something like a setup is the most profitable job,
Yeah.
why is that one have a bigger margin in it than anything else? I'm just curious. I'm not
For me-
challenging you. I'm just asking.
For me, it's really the amount of time that's generally required for me to complete a setup in total is drastically lower than any other job. Obviously we've all been doing setups for a very long time.
Mhm.
For a while there, I worked at a company called Guitar Chimp. Guitar Chimp still exists. They are, at one point, they were the #1 reseller of Les Pauls online worldwide.
Well, you moved from Guitar Chimp all the way up to Guitar Czar, so
Actually, yeah,
hierarchy
a lot of evolution. Yeah.
I think I've seen that drawing somewhere.
So, at Guitar Chimp, I almost did nothing but setups. It was either setups or neck resets. There was not a lot of in between at that job. And what that did is that helped me identify a lot of things in a setup that was something that could carry over. I went through and I measured the height of the bottom of a stop tail piece on every single Les Paul when I was done with it, every single SG when I was done with it, every Strat, I measured everything out and wrote it down afterwards. And then I took a ton of those, compiled them together so that I found that okay, I can get a Les Paul, I can set my stop tail piece to this height, I can set my bridge to this height before I have strings on the guitar. And that's going to cut down on a bunch of my time. So for me, I can get setups done so quickly that that is without question my most high value job. It's not the job I do very often, but even for the guys in my shop, at this point now they've done so many setups that they've reached a point where it's also the fastest job for all of them outside of a restring or installing a Strat button.
Yeah, I guess if you put it in context, and it depends on the job itself too. Because you're talking about doing a setup just as a setup.
Yeah.
But if you have a guitar come in that's getting a refret, a nut, like say an acoustic guitar, let's say, a refret, a nut, a saddle, and a setup, if you've done your refret well, if you made your nut right, you made your saddle right, by the time the guitar is ready for strings, it's probably the easiest setup you could ever do, because the guitar at that point almost sets itself up if you've done your job well.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean I'm not going to charge a customer for a setup, but I think, I guess in that sense you can be certainly right. But there have been guitars that hit the bench where if it's just in for a setup and you take it out. Now, everybody knows how I charge for things. It's a la carte, so I knew it when I saw it on the intake and charged for it. But if a guitar is like, got several generations of DNA on the fingerboard before, as part of a setup, it's getting an upcharge for cleaning. But some of those guitars, it takes a while to dial them in. I would, so.
Yeah. And with if you're spending the time assessing those jobs afterwards, going, oh, what took a long time? What was getting in my way?
Mhm.
When you have similar jobs come down the pipeline in the future, you can identify those things immediately.
Yeah, and that all goes into the pricing aspect of things when you're doing your intake. I don't want to go into that cul-de-sac because we could spend all day there. Michael, any final thoughts?
Well, just one that I was thinking about while I was listening to Moses talk, in terms of productivity and profit. There's a lot of customer interaction, and at least in my case, not everybody I talk to orders a guitar, and sometimes I will spend still a lot of time back and forth emails, sending ideas back and forth, and it never goes anywhere. A check never gets cut, and it was a lesson for me to learn that I also need to think about charging for the time that I don't get orders, in the cost of my guitars, where I do get orders, so that time is not just unaccounted for.
Okay, so that would go under the category of productive time, in this case, hours spent building a guitar at the price point of the guitar. Because the thing with profit and productivity and all of that relating to an instrument that's being purchased is, at the end of the day, you have an item that's being purchased. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And that item has a price tag to it. So putting everything into that funnel, at the end of the day, you have a product that's being sold. And you can put it in different characterizations. Yeah, for some people who are buying a guitar, especially at the end of the spectrum that you at the higher end of guitars being built, it's also an experience, and I understand that aspect of it. But what you're saying is that you have to make sure that you're building into the price of your product enough of a margin to pay you for those non-productive hours, just like you would have in a shop, making sure your hourly rate is such that when you're at the bench, that those bench hours are paying for the hours that you're not at your bench.
Yeah, that's exactly the way I think about it. That I know that not every inquiry I get is going to result in a sale, and I need to have enough profit in the guitars that I do sell to also cover that time spent.
That's a good. But how do you put a measuring stick to that? Is that something you're still kind of working your way through? Is that like wet finger in the air kind of thing?
Yeah, it's just
or is it a conscious effort to cut down on the time, to know when to cut the line?
Not really, because I try and treat every, well, I shouldn't say I try. I treat every inquiry I get as seriously as I can. That usually means long emails, going into great details, explanations, links to photo galleries, so it's it can add up. And I found that when it didn't result in an order, uh, it would leave me feeling a little bit frustrated, mostly just about the time that I spent preparing all that material. And so when I think about pricing, my guitars, it is in my mind that I need buffer in there because it's an unpredictable business.
Mm-hmm.
Things always comes up. Sales don't go through. Maybe somebody, goes so far in an order and then changes their mind or drops out or
Yeah, I think a lot of that stuff is going to come up when we meet to talk about the pricing for the builder's edition. I think we're going to be exploring a lot of that stuff in detail. I think though that is that more of an argument to make sure that your pricing reflects the hours you're spending doing that, or is it trying to figure out a way to like almost not completely, but to a degree, automate that process that you'll be able to, have a lot of preloaded emails that you can save a given amount of text, so
Yeah.
is that kind of thing, or having photo galleries preloaded so you can just click a button and boom, you can send them every picture of every guitar you practically ever made, and that
Yes. It's been both. It's been a balancing act between, personal attention, like this potential client asked me about this wood combination. And so I want to address that very specifically. But then also I may include, and here is a write-up on my view of tone woods and their effect on sound. And, I'll even cue them in that, these are my general thoughts about it. This is not specific to you.
Okay.
So some of that stuff is preloaded, but it took a while to get there to kind of generate all of the content, to be able to send to people.
That's an interesting concept. I mean, we've experienced to a degree. I mean, I've had customers that I just had one the end of 2023. I spent the better part of almost 4 months emails back and forth about a major restoration project that, not a major restoration, but a decent size restoration on a guitar that we emailed back and forth, a couple of hours cumulatively, a couple of hours of phone time talking about all the nitty-gritty details, ultimately to find that it's the guitar is already in somebody else's shop. And he was still contacting me about it, and I'm like, really? And it's at the end of that process, you feel like, okay, well, I guess I can presume that there are a fair amount of tire kickers in the guitar buying world, is probably even more so to a degree than in the restoration world. But I guess that kind of comes with the territory, doesn't it?
Yeah, it just comes with the territory. I guess what I'm trying to say is just that it's something I'm aware of, and I try and account for that in my productivity and profit.
Okay. Yeah, that's a really good point. So before we wrap this up, does anybody have any questions for our illustrious guests at all?
Anybody? Bueller?
I do.
Are they all asleep?
I'm gonna spotlight everybody. Hold on a
Dave
second.
Stouty has a question.
The distinguished gentleman from the great state of
Texas.
Texas.
Well, actually, a couple different states, but I'm here now.
But
Have you
still a
guys-
distinguished gentleman.
Have any of you guys read Bob Taylor's book, Guitar Lessons?
Oh my God, with the Bob Taylor stuff, David.
No.
I'm not holding this up as a promotion because I worked for him for 24 years.
Mhm.
But there's a lot of lessons in here, like exactly what you guys have been talking about. I missed the first hour where I was doing a project for my son.
That's where all the important stuff was.
And of course. But no, he had when he first started, he decided to build batches of guitars in 10,
Right.
and it went terrible. And he had Augie Loprenzi come in and look at his operation, and Augie was like, Bob, would you rather have, he's looking at it going, okay, you have one done, almost two done, and you have got 8 in the various stages of finish problems, and because they were spraying nitro and going back for rework. Would you rather have 2 or 3 done and have that money in your pocket, or 8 in some state of a mess? And that's when Bob made his batch down to doing 4 guitars at a time.
Okay.
It's just kind of all kind of lessons like that.
Okay.
And then later on, I mean, he would come in.
For the guy that refrets 30 guitars at once, I would probably not do very well at the Taylor factory.
Well, this is not a, I mean, it's 2 different things. It's apples and oranges.
Yes.
So if you imagine a neck, you know, that's just square still, peg heads on, truss rods in, fingerboards on, it's kind of roughly bandsawed out. He would come in later on, if he could shape 4 of these necks and get them sanded to go to finish between 7 and 10 a.m. in the morning. That's like 45 minutes a neck. Shaping it by hand on the back of a 6x48 sander.
Yeah.
Then he could move on to building jigs and making machines. And so I just had to get those 4 necks done by 10.
Okay.
So I could move on. And that's, you know, having worked there, if you show up to work at Taylor Guitars and you don't have a good work ethic, you'll find out what one is real quick.
Holy shit.
So
It's a good book. I've seen it. I've read it twice. Listened to it basically. I'll put it on in the shop and listen to books all the time while I'm working.
Mm-hmm.
So that's all I've got. Read the book before the next builders thing.
Yeah.
Michael, have you read it?
No, I didn't. I'm not aware of it, but I will get a copy.
Guitar Lessons.
Okay. When did it come out?
Geez, like over 10 years ago.
No.
Sure, you can get on Amazon.
Great book. It's on
2011.
2011.
Yeah, there should only be one copy left because I just ordered one.
Any other questions for our illustrious panel before we shut this down? On the
Thank you.
subject of profit?
Well, I did want to say, and I put it in the chat, that I've been sort of obsessed with workflow in general. And if you're looking at profitability and efficiency, I think workflow is critical to that. And the points about mistakes and having to fix things, I think is critical. I think workflow could be an ongoing topic for whatever that's worth. But thank you to everybody that's.
Yeah, we're gonna do an entire Loothing for Dollars segment on shop organization and workflow. I got a whole list of these that we're gonna do. So the whole idea with these things is not that, and you know, I would rather a panel like this so that we don't all do the same things in the same way. That we, you know, I'm looking for, you know, disagreement, not, you know, not conflict, but disagreement in the sense that I want a variety of opinions and approaches, and that's why the panel will always kind of shift in its, depending on the subject matter, to bring a variety of opinions. But we're going to continue, you know, going into lots of different avenues, lots of different topics. This is going to happen probably once every other month kind of thing. The next one is going to be in April. We're going to revisit the subject of pricing, and that'll be from a builder's perspective. So it'll be pricing for the guitar builder. Us repair people could probably learn a lot from that. And then from there, it's just we're just going to do a variety of topics as time marches on. We're going to pick a topic, drill as far down as we can get, so that we can get down to the you know, the subjects that never actually get talked about, you know. So, so if nobody has any other questions, I'm going to ask everybody if they could unmute and thank our panel, Michael, Nicole, and Moses. It was, as far as I was concerned, it was a brilliant chat. So I really
Very
appreciate
nice.
your time today. So if you could say thank you to everybody, I'd appreciate it.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone. Thanks for sharing.
Thanks.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Moses.
Doug, thanks for hosting.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Thank you.
An honor to even be here.
All right. You guys have a great Sunday.
Have a good
So-
night, guys.
Okay. Night.
Take
Bye,
care.
Michael.